Good morning. This is Kentucky Equal Justice Radio. I'm Miranda Brown, and today I'm here with Leah Engle, Director of Maxwell Street Legal Clinic, and Natalie Dietrich, also a practitioner at Maxwell Street. Good morning, you all.
Good morning.
Good
Buenos
morning.
dias.
And, this show is Kentucky Equal Justice Radio. We're all about your rights. So your rights in the workplace, your rights in healthcare, your rights as an immigrant, etc. And today we're going to be discussing public charge, which is a rule that affects some immigrants, not all. And I do want to point out that you may be listening to this program on air or online, but note that we are recording it on May 4th, 2020. So the information that we're sharing is as of today, May 4th, 2020. So, all right, guys. So tell us, what is public charge? Why is it important to know about?
Yeah, so public charge is a test to determine if someone applying for their green card or their lawful permanent residence or for a visa to enter the United States seems likely to depend on public benefits in the future. There's been a lot of information in the news and a lot of, rumor things surrounding public charge since the current administration announced new regulations last year. But public charge, like in and of itself, is not a new concept in U.S. immigration law. It's a test that's existed, for over 100 years. What we're seeing now, though, is the expansion of the public charge definition from someone who is, more likely than not to receive all of their or most of their support from the government to just someone who seems likely to be receiving public benefits in the future. So if the government decides someone is likely to be a public charge, it can result in a denial of their green card or visa application. And so that's, I guess, public charge kind of in a nutshell.
Okay, so how did, if it's been a policy for a long time, what changed recently and when did that happen?
Yeah, so there were new regulations introduced by the Trump administration that were originally supposed to go into effect on October 15th of 2019. However, that was delayed due to several ongoing court cases. And so the judges in those cases had issued an injunction or a rule preventing the government from allowing the new rule to go into effect while the cases were pending. However, in January of this year, the Supreme Court stayed those injunctions, which would allow the rule to go into effect. And on February 24th of this year, so February 24th of 2020, the new public charge regulations went into effect for applications with USCIS, so with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services here in the United States, and also with the Department of State. So that encompasses immigration visas that people are applying for both in the United States and overseas.
Okay, so as far as how the rule has changed, how do you see who is affected by it specifically, like
Yes,
directly?
Directly. So public charge affects people who are applying for permanent residence in the United States through a U.S. citizen or permanent resident family member, or who are applying for a visa to enter the United States. So it's actually a fairly small category or fairly small number of the immigrants coming to the United States are actually captured in the public charge rule.
Okay, so that's who's affected directly, and then who's not affected by the rule at all? Directly.
Yes. So there are a number of categories of immigrants and non-immigrants who coming to the United States or already in the United States, and the public charge rule just doesn't apply to them. And so some of the big category, or like most forms of what would be considered like humanitarian relief, are not subject to public charge. So refugees, asylees, when they're coming into the United States with their initial status and when they're applying for their green card, like that, they're completely exempt from the public charge rule. People with a U visa, a T visa, VAWA, special immigrant juvenile status, DACA and TPS applicants, they're all exempt from, or I guess public charge doesn't apply at the, when people are applying for DACA or TPS. Most permanent residents, so like if you already have your green card and are applying for naturalization, for citizenship, you're not, there is no public charge test at that point. It's only at the point where you're applying for your green card. And US citizens aren't covered by public charge. So if, looking at immigrant families or mixed status families, if you have US citizen children or other US citizens in the family and they are receiving public benefits, their receipt of public benefits is not going to count against the intending immigrant for public charge.
Okay, so one of the things that is important to keep in mind for us about this rule, and when we're telling people about it, is that there's specific people that are impacted directly and not, but because it's so nuanced, so it's a complicated rule, that a lot of people are just afraid of it, and so they've been worried about enrolling in public benefits, for instance, even though they would actually not be affected. So can you tell us more about that and how it's affecting people?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a number of clients or people even just calling our office who, maybe they are already a green card holder or a lawful permanent resident and they're applying for their citizenship and they're concerned about applying for benefits, or they're asylees or refugees. And so they're completely exempt from public charge kind of across the spectrum. And that they still don't want to apply for benefits. People are disenrolling their US citizen children who are, entitled to these benefits because of these fears and concerns. And I think an important thing is for people to just, if they are concerned, to reach out. They can reach out to us at Maxwell Street, or there are several other, Kentucky Refugee Ministries, other nonprofits, other immigration attorneys for advice on their particular situation, because it is a very kind of complicated and nuanced area of the law. People focus on the public benefits piece, but really it's the public charge test is a kind of a multi-factored test where they're looking at not just receipt of public benefits, but income and age and education level and English level. So it's pretty complicated, and just if people are concerned, we definitely would recommend that they reach out to get advice on their particular situation.
Right, and it's important that they, talk to people who are experts in this field specifically. So people who know about immigrant eligibility for public benefits and immigration attorneys, right?
Right. Yes. It's because it is a complicated area that, we see it sits at this intersection of immigration law and public benefits law. And so it's important to make sure the person, that you're consulting with experts and that people who are very familiar with the regulation with immigrant eligibility for benefits, to make sure that you're getting proper advice.
Right. So I know that myself, I help people sign up for Medicaid, and sometimes people call me with questions about SNAP or food stamps, but I don't do much of that. I'm not really certified in the same way to do that. So, but anyway, people call me and I help them with their Medicaid, and sometimes they're concerned about public charge. And so I have had to talk people um, through that, you know, say you have a U visa or asylum and you don't have to worry about public charge because you are exempt from the public charge assessment. So I know that I've seen it indirectly impact my clients because of that fear. And if they hadn't had somebody walking them through the process, they might have disenrolled or not even applied for Medicaid, you know, or other benefits that they really needed. So I've seen that kind of indirect impact where these clients actually wouldn't have been considered for public charge anyway. How have you seen at Maxwell Street, where you all practice immigration law, how have you seen it directly or indirectly impact your clients?
Yeah, so we've seen a far more, especially because of the actual limited scope of public charge with the, it doesn't apply to many categories of immigrants. It doesn't apply at citizenship or at the point of applying for citizenship. We've seen far more indirect impacts than direct impacts. We have a number of clients who aren't subject to public charge, whether because they're applying for citizenship or whether they're in a category, asylees, U visas, and similar in your case, where they don't public charge, they're exempt from public charge, so they are entitled to benefits, they qualify for benefits, they should be signing up for benefits. But they've heard about public charge in the news and they're scared. So we've had people disenroll from benefits or decide not to enroll in Medicaid or in SNAP, even though, we've talked them through it, we've counseled them, advised them that they, are exempt from public charge, and yet that fear still drives them to not seek the help that they need. And so that's what we're hoping to continue providing education and advice so that people are seeking the help that they need and aren't, disenrolling or not getting benefits because of fear.
Right. Well, I think after the break, I'd like to come back and talk a little bit more about any situations where you have seen a direct impact of public, maybe not the rule change, but public charge in general. But we're out of time for the first segment, so we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back to keep talking.
Great.
Welcome back. So you are listening to Kentucky Equal Justice Radio, and I'm Miranda, and I'm here with Leah Engle, director of Maxwell Street Legal Clinic here in Lexington, and Natalie Dietrich, also a practitioner at Maxwell Street. And we were just talking about public charge, which is a rule that affects some immigrants directly, but not all immigrants. And we were talking about how it affects your clients. And so you told me a little bit about how, your clients have a lot of fear about it, even if they're not directly affected. But tell us a little bit about how you talk about public charge with your clients, how it comes up and how it doesn't.
Yeah, so our clients who are directly impacted by the rule are going to be those who are petitioning for a family member or applying through a green card based on that family petition and that family relationship. And so these are people who are impacted by the public charge rule, but really generally not impacted because of the receipt of benefits, because in most of these cases, they're in the United States undocumented, or they've never been in the United States. And so they, if they're here and they don't have documentation, or they have DACA, or they have some temporary form of status, they're not likely to qualify for public benefits. They're not going to be eligible for Medicaid. They're not going to be receiving SNAP. And obviously, if they've never been in the United States, they're not going to be receiving benefits from the US government. So they're not really impacted by the receipt of benefits in the past, but and this is what what people tend to forget about and focus on public charge as a public benefits test is it really is a multi-factored test. It looks at income, it looks at education, it looks at age. So people can be struggling with or be potentially at risk of being deemed a public charge without ever receiving benefits. And we at Maxwell Street, we work primarily with low income immigrants and refugees, or in this case, immigrant families. So our clients, even before the change in the public charge rule, sometimes struggled to meet the certain income limits that are in place with the family petition. Because even before the expanded public charge, like there was you had to be able to demonstrate income of a certain level in order to be able to petition for a family member. So when we talk to these families, we talk about the necessity, if their income is on the lower end, or we talk to them about finding a joint sponsor, finding someone who can help them show income, of documenting education, documenting English, the potential that they'll be able to find a job when they come into the United States, or when they have work authorization, being able to work legally. So that's where our clients are really directly impacted by the public charge rule, is not so much from the receipt of public benefits, but from the other factors in this test.
Right. And that's something good to highlight, I think, that it's not necessarily the public benefits that are going to impact your immigration. So let's talk specifically about when you are looking at public benefits, what programs are considered for public charge assessment and what programs are not at all.
Yeah, so for the public charge assessment, prior to, receipt of cash benefits have always been counted towards the public charge rule. So if you are we're receiving most of your support through cash benefits or through long-term care in a residential facility, those benefits would always be considered part of public charge, and that remains true today. But it's been really expanded to include Medicaid, so federally funded Medicaid. There are some exceptions to that for children who are under the age of 21, for emergency Medicaid, for Medicaid use during pregnancy. But for the most part, federally funded Medicaid is going to be counted towards public charge. Federally funded food stamps, or SNAP, federal public housing, so Section 8 housing assistance or other project-based rental assistance. And then, like I said, federal, state, and local cash assistance have always counted federal cash assistance has always counted towards public charge. Now, local and state cash assistance also is going to count. And then long-term institutionalized care paid for by the federal government has always been a part, or has been a part of public charge before the rule expansion, and remains a benefit covered under the public charge determination.
All right, so that's a few programs that are considered. What about programs that are not considered for public charge at all, and people don't need to be worried about them in the first place?
Yeah, so there are a lot of programs that are not covered under public charge. For example, use of WIC, so is it women, infants, and children? That's not going to count towards public charge at all. Like I mentioned, Medicaid for pregnant women, which includes up to 60 days after a pregnancy. Emergency Medicaid, Medicaid use by children under the age of 21 is not going to count towards the public charge determination. And that, by the way, is towards the public charge determination for that child if they are applying for a green card later. Medicaid use by children, U.S. citizen children, or other children is never going to count against their parent for the public charge determination. Head Start, is not going to count. Use of a Head Start program is not going to count towards public charge. Free and reduced cost school lunches don't count towards public charge. And many other benefits, a lot of times benefits offered by states or counties are not going to count towards that public charge determination. In the case of most of the time in the case of like a natural disaster, or state of emergency, you know, receiving benefits during or receiving help towards that emergency is not going to count.
So what about, speaking of emergencies, what about the pandemic stimulus payments?
So the pandemic stimulus payments are not going to count towards public charge, but unfortunately, many immigrants and mixed status families are not going to be eligible to be receiving those stimulus payments anyway. In order to qualify for the stimulus payments, everyone on a family's tax return has to be filing with a valid Social Security number. So for you know, undocumented families who are all filing with ITINs or individual tax identity numbers, they're not going to qualify. And mixed status families, if somebody is filing with an ITIN, unfortunately are not going to qualify for the stimulus payment.
What about unemployment benefits?
Unemployment benefits are not going to count towards public charge because in general, unemployment benefits are not considered a public benefit. They are, it's an employment insurance that your employer is going to be paying into. So it's actually what's considered an earned benefit. So it's based on the work that you have done. In order to qualify for unemployment insurance, generally you do have to be working lawfully. But each state has different rules in that regard. But just the receipt of unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits are not going to be an issue with public charge.
Okay, thanks. So we've got about 3 minutes left. So just time check. There, speaking about, you know, these things that people are having to apply for right now because of the pandemic, what are, I know the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service has put out some information that, you know, they're going to exempt some services related to COVID-19. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, the rule is still going into effect. There's been some push to delay it or to you know, while COVID, not count for public charge with COVID-19. And that's not the case entirely. The rule is still going into effect, is going to remain in effect during the state of emergency. However, receipt of public benefits or receipt of testing and treatment for COVID-19 is not going to count towards the public charge determination. So as we discussed, like emergency Medicaid never counts towards public charge. So if you're receiving emergency Medicaid for treatment, you know, that's going to be exempt. If you're receiving some other form of Medicaid during your treatment, that's more of a gray area. So in those cases, we would just recommend people, if they're receiving those benefits specifically for treatment and testing of COVID-19, to maintain or to hold on to their documentation and records, their medical records, their billing records, so that if they are applying for a green card in the future and that particular, and that becomes an issue, then they're then able to prove that it was for the testing and treatment of COVID-19, and that will make it exempt.
Okay, perfect. Important to know right now. So in the last minute, can we just go over real quickly, how can people find information about this and how can people get help if they have questions?
Yeah, so one of a great source of information about public charge and even as it relates to COVID-19 is the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign, of which we're a member at Kentucky Equal Justice Center. And so their website has a lot of great resources in a multitude of languages. So it's protectingimmigrantfamilies.org. If people need help locally, you know, we can help them here at Maxwell Street Legal Clinic, can answer questions. Other trusted immigration attorneys can as well. Our number is 859-233-3840. We are working remotely some with the pandemic, but we are generally, you know, if you call us, we're not answering, go ahead and leave a message, because we are checking messages and returning calls. And just so it's important to remember, even though the rule has gone into effect, like, this isn't over. The court cases are still ongoing. People are still you know, fighting and supporting our immigrant community, and so it's just important to remember that, like, it's not over yet.
Good, thank you. And I do want to emphasize also that, you know, if you are an immigrant and don't have health insurance, for instance, and need health care, or you do have health insurance, or whatever the case, if you are in need and you're worried about public charge, like, if it's an emergency, go call 911 or go to the hospital. Like, don't hesitate because of a risk of public charge. Like, there are you have a right to medical care, and so that's really important to keep in mind, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, and especially that since COVID-19 treatment is exempt from public charge consideration anyway. So I'll say the number again for Maxwell Street Legal Clinic if you have questions about immigration, 859-233-3840. And just a reminder, this program we recorded on May 4th, 2020. So stay tuned to RadioLex and other information from Kentucky Equal Justice Center for updates in the future. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.